Thank you so much, y'all. If you guys are enjoying these tunes, they are available online. Don't get too excited. If you like what you're hearing, just look up Jeb Bush Orchestra on Spotify. We'll come to you. We got one more song with the Jeb Bush Orchestra. We're from Boston on our first tour, so thank you so much for the support. Yeah, this last song is called Arnold Palmer. Sometimes I have trouble saying that. I'm like Arnold Palmer, and it's like sometimes it just doesn't make it out of my mouth, make it from the brain to the mouth. But we're gonna see if we can get this song from our brains to our hands, to our amplifiers, to your ears. I think that's how it works. Cincinnati's Ben Hammer on the keys. Willis Edmondson on the drums. Luke Bergamini on the bass. Grant Bloom on guitar. Thank you guys with the Jeb Bush Orchestra. Find us online. Come see us next time we come out here to Cincinnati. We'll be back very soon. It's been a wonderful time here. Get a t-shirt, get a coaster, get a CD. We got it all. Have a good night. Be good. This next song goes out to Randy. Guys, thank you so much for listening and joining us here at Urban Artifact. Thanks for having us. This song is called Headband. Ben Hammer on the keys, y'all.
All right, good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming out on this very nasty night. I appreciate you running between the raindrops. I have several announcements to make before we get started. First, next month, on Wednesday, May the 3rd, we'll be back here again at Urban Artifact, and our speaker will be Bennett Kotler. Bennett is the project manager for the Mill Creek Alliance, and he's going to speak on environmental restoration of the Mill Creek. I don't know, we have a comparatively young audience, but as a native Cincinnatian, the Mill Creek was more than a cesspool for many, many years, and you know, they've worked really hard over the last couple decades or more, you know, to try to clean that up. So this will be an interesting topic because he's going to talk about all the challenges involved in trying to do restoration. And then I want to draw your attention to what's behind me, and I've put out sheets there. We have a very special event happening later this month in support of Earth Day. It is going to be on Monday, April the 24th, and it's going to be held at the brand new Cincinnati Playhouse in the Park. I had the opportunity to do a walkthrough there a little over a week ago, and the new facility is amazing. The theaters are tremendous. Everything they've done from the lobbies and the plaza and the rehearsal halls, et cetera, is excellent. And the Playhouse actually reached out to us to see if we would like to have a special event and utilize some of their space. So we're taking advantage of that. So this is going to center around climate change and sustainability. And you can see on the sheets that it's going to run from 5 to 8 o'clock. From 5 to 6:30, there will be food, and we have a number of environmental or nature organizations who will be tabling that you can interact with. Some of those include Cincinnati Nature Center, Civic Garden Center, Hamilton County Department of Environmental Sciences, and Net Impact UC, including some others. Then we move on to a panel discussion about environmental activism and sustainability. And so the four speakers we have are David Stradling, who's the Director of Environmental Sciences at UC, Ali Kroner, who is the Director of the Office of Environment and Sustainability at the City of Cincinnati, and then two more folks from the University of Cincinnati, go Bearcats, I guess. Jen Vasconcelos, who's Vice President of Operations for Net Impact UC, and Alexis Wimbush, who is working on her Master's of Community Planning, and she's particularly interested in sustainability and urban design. So I think it'll be a very engaging forum to talk about those topics and see, hopefully we can come away with some positive vibe about sustainability as we go forward. So for tonight's program, normally we would have, you know, one speaker and one general topic. Last year we did this, of course this was still back when we were COVID and we were Zooming, but we did Science Shots, and what Science Shots was dubbed as was where we would have several speakers just give a brief discussion about a particular topic, and then, you know, go on from there. And so we have several speakers here tonight. So our first speaker is Craig Deitch. Deitch, I'm sorry, Deitch.
Okay, not the first.
Yeah. And Craig is the Associate Professor and Department Chair of the Department of Geosciences at UC. He's going to talk about rare earth metals in Western Kentucky. So please welcome Craig.
All right. Wow. This is great. Thank you. Hi, everybody.
I teach courses in mineralogy and petrology. So that's courses in minerals and rocks. That's where the stuff is. The stuff we need for our modern world is in minerals, and the minerals make up rocks. And we got to mine the rocks and mine the minerals to get the stuff. Okay, so I'm interested in asking the question, how many cars are on the road today in the United States? Ballpark figure. 300, the answer is 300 million. And lithium batteries in cars require lithium-based batteries in cars, how many pounds of lithium do they require per battery? 20. 20 pounds. Right, so we need 6 billion pounds of lithium if we're going to transition all the cars in the United States to battery power. Now, there's another very important element we need in batteries to make them last longer and to run more efficiently, and those elements are the so-called rare earth elements, the REEs. And they're the weird things on the periodic table that are like down below where everything else is in their special rows. They're sometimes called the lanthanides. And they have weird names like europium and praseodymium and neodymium, and there are these weird elements down there. But they're very important for batteries. And how many pounds of those elements, which are very rare in nature, how many pounds do we need of rare earth elements in lithium batteries for cars? This is the good news. Per battery, right. No, yeah, we need like 5 grams. We need like hardly any. It's like 0.1 pound. We need only like 15 million pounds of that stuff. Okay. To do all the cars in the United States. So don't mean to be the bearer of bad news when we're coming to Earth Day and all that, but if we really want to make the transition to solid energy economy away from liquid energy economy, we're going to have to mine, pardon my French, the crap out of everything everywhere. Okay, we need this stuff. And currently, the United States has one mine in California that does REEs. And we import like 99% of our REEs from China? Thank you. From China. Right, from China. Good old anti-democratic China. So there's a whole interesting ball of wax here that we could get into about geopolitics and ethics and international relations. Okay, so we need to find the stuff. The United States Department of Interior and the U.S. Geological Survey is part of the Department of Interior. It has a program now that's been running for about 3 years called Earth MRI. I don't like that title very much myself, but it stands for Mineral Resources Initiative. And the federal government is spending a lot of money at the state level to go find out where all the good stuff is. The lithium, the rare earth elements, the cobalt, the vanadium, the molybdenum, all the stuff we need for our high-tech society and to make the transition to green energy. Because we need all this stuff for not only car batteries, but for wind turbines and for solar panels. We need all this stuff. Okay, so it turns out that Earth MRI has helped me discover really super cool rocks in western Kentucky. And in western Kentucky and in southern Illinois, there's this interesting district called the Illinois-Kentucky fluorspar district. And fluorspar is the mineral fluorite. Miners call it fluorspar. I tried to change the name to fluorite, but my colleague said, no, fluorspar. So in western Kentucky and southern Illinois, there's this interesting district that has all kinds of cool things happening that emphasize the complexity of geological processes, the time scale of geological processes, and how things are connected to other things, which are connected to other things, which are connected to other things. So we have discovered interesting rocks in western Kentucky that contain rare earth elements. And these rocks are very bizarre rocks. They're called carbonatites. And they're called carbonatites because They are igneous rocks, the form from the freezing of liquid rock, magma, that are full of carbonate minerals. That's just a very crazy thing because most carbonate minerals form rocks on Earth's seafloor, full of fossils. The famous Cincinnatian bedrock is made of carbonates with all the wonderful fossils. Like, what is calcite doing in igneous systems? But it is. And these carbonatites are very rich in rare earth elements. So we're trying to figure out, we being me and colleagues from the Kentucky Geological Survey, graduate students in our department, colleagues at the Illinois Geological Survey, we're trying to figure out the origin and the genesis of these carbonatites and to see whether or not, in fact, they have high concentrations of rare earth elements. If they do, there's the possibility that we will open carbonatite mines in southern Illinois and western Kentucky to retrieve the very valuable rare earth elements. I'd like to conclude by saying mines in the United States are few and far between. To make a mine in the United States, you require three big things to kind of come together, and they often don't these days. One, you've got to have the right geology. So you not only got to have the right rocks, the right minerals, the right concentrations of the stuff you want to make it economic, but in detail, at the microscopic level, you've got to make sure you can extract, crush and grind and separate out the stuff you want, because sometimes you can't. And if you can't separate it out and put it in a processing plant, all bets are off, even though it may be super high concentration. So you got to have the geology's got to all come together. Then you need all the regulatory world to kind of align. The stars have to align. This takes a very long time to get the permits and to do the environmental assessments and all of that. So that's all got to align. And then you've got to get the societal impacts to align also. You know what? I do understand there's no free lunch. And by the way, not all my undergraduates understand that phrase yet, but they will. When they get to be my age, they will. So you've got to realize, you know what? It's good that we want, okay, we're going to not have a perfect mind, but you know what? We've got to get to solid energy. We've got to get off coal. We got to get off oil. We got to get off natural gas. So mining is going to be worth the price. And that societal element has to come together. If all three of those things don't align, you know, we're not going to be mining the stuff. So they're really cool. There's really amazing geology in western Kentucky. Who knew? That's another 20-minute lecture. But some of the good stuff, the rare earth elements are there. And maybe we'll be mining those rocks in western Kentucky and southern Illinois to help us make low-emission cars on our road. Thank you very much. Happy to take questions. Question?
Yeah, so I was just wondering, you said it's kind of surprising that the rock is there.
Yes.
Do you have a hypothesis?
Yes, this is such a great thing we love about geology. These are igneous rocks, and most igneous rocks are formed on Earth at the igneous rock factories, and those are the so-called tectonic plate boundaries. So in the middle of the oceans where the new crust is being formed, Earth's making huge amounts of magmatic rocks. Where one plate sinks beneath another, like the Ring of Fire around the Pacific Ocean, huge amounts of igneous rocks. But in this part of the world, there are no modern plate boundaries, but there was one way back more than 1 billion years ago. So the North American continent, which at that time was joined to a bunch of other continents in a supercontinent called Rodinia, tried to break apart, like East Africa is doing now, but it failed. That weakened the crust and brought the Earth's mantle very close to the surface, and subsequent events allowed that weak crust, shallow mantle to generate these igneous rocks. So geology is all about like this, things sort of line up one after another, and then certain other things, unusual things can happen.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So,
Yes.
So based on the current best available chemistry of
economy batteries, how often would you need to remine those 6 or 4 ounces per battery in order to replenish its capability to hold a charge?
I don't know. That's a good question for an engineer. That's a good question for an engineer. But you know, it's interesting. There was in southern Greenland, there's one of the world's most rich deposits of rare earth elements in an interesting, complicated complex of igneous rocks that are related to the opening of the Atlantic Ocean. And geologists know this place. The rocks are beautiful, really cool, full of rare earths. And there was and a company wanted to begin mining there, and it was brought up to vote in Greenland, and they said, nope, don't want it. We like our place the way it is. Don't want any mines, railroads, processing plants, mills, pollution, blah, blah, blah. So that's a place that, you know, there are mines out there that we could get these rare earth elements. But I kind of think you're asking about recycling the batteries.
Yeah.
I suppose that, you know, I don't know I'm not sure about that technology, but it must be present, right? These are precious little things. You need just 5 grams per battery. Is it worth getting the 5 grams out of a battery? Is it worth opening another mine? I'm not sure. Question.
All right, so great. Where in the process are you and the other geological survey folks in assessing the likelihood that you can extract it profitably?
Right. Well,
what's the continuum?
We're at the process, we're evaluating the rare earth element concentrations of lots and lots of rocks. These rocks were originally mined for zinc and fluoride. And there are these interesting rocks, the carbonatites, are underground. They're several thousand feet below the surface, and they've been drilled, and we have drill core. So we're analyzing the rocks in the drill core. And in western Kentucky, there's this very cool thing called the Cofield anomaly. And the Cofield anomaly has a magnetic signature, just like other proven carbonatites elsewhere. It's never been drilled. We could use about $15 million to punch a few holes into that and see whether there's carbonatite down there or not. Maybe it isn't carbonatite. Maybe it's something else. But we're assessing the rocks we have accessibility to. And it turns out there's a whole group of rocks related to the carbonatites that we thought were going to have a lot of rare earths, and they don't. So that was a little disappointing. And the fluorites, the mineral fluorite, we thought was going to have a lot of rare earths. Had a graduate student working on a project. I'm going to strike it rich, retire early, make $1 million. They didn't have any rare earths in them either. Question?
So the MRI,
Yeah.
how they detected it, the magnetic field?
Yeah, well, the magnetic data, this is like a lot of things in geology. The magnetic data is super old, was reprocessed. And the signals were like, whoa, there's the big signal now. That with new like, higher powered computers allow the old data to be reprocessed. So we saw that. Earth MRI is involving a lot of geologists on the ground to make maps, to do gravity surveys, magnetic surveys, just to kind of reassess what's out there with this new thought that we need a lot of critical minerals. Critical because they're critical to infrastructure, technology, defense, and we currently import them from, maybe not so friendly partners. And we're dependent on imports. That makes them critical. And I've learned that the Earth MRI project has basically 2 budgets. One for the lower 48, smaller. One for Alaska, bigger. Right, so in my humble opinion, all the action that's coming out of the MRI program is going to come from Alaska. Not very many people. Not many people go there. A lot of open space. A lot of beautiful, pristine land. The political environment's favorable to extraction. Yeah. So it's a really interesting, it's a very interesting dynamic about this whole how we're going to get to greener economy, how we're going to get to greener energy. It requires a lot of interlocking pieces to line up. And it's complicated and will take time. And it's big. We want to go all the way. It's a big project. It's a big deal. Yeah. So the idea that we're all going to be driving electric cars in 2030, I don't think so.
I mean, it's, I guess, high in the sky, but it's possible in the next year or two that someone comes up with a way to make a battery that doesn't, or a system of batteries,
Totally. Yeah.
and then we don't need it.
Yeah, the technological genie might come out of the bottle and it's like, wow, we got a breakthrough. Let's hope so. That'd be awesome. Let's spend money to get some smart people working on these problems. Yeah. Anyone else? It's, it's, I can see, I've got my guitar up here, so the lights, it's hard to see into the crowd. There's one more.
I'm not sure if this is, I missed the beginning, so I'm not sure if this is your area of expertise, but we're talking about electric cars.
It isn't electric cars.
All right. Yeah, I got you.
Okay,
All right.
I'll try.
I'll just throw it out there. So I've heard that the environmental impact of creating an electric car is greater than making a normal car. How long does it take for somebody driving an electric car to come out net ahead, basically?
I've read that somewhere. It's like 5 years, 7 years, something like that. I think it depends on the power plant that's generating the juice when you plug in your car.
Right.
So, the
So depending on where you live.
the skeptics say, oh yeah, you drive an electric car in Cincinnati, it's a coal-fired power plant that's giving you the electricity. So, but it's complicated. It's going to take everybody across the spectrum: scientists, politicians, community activists, policy people, all kinds of people to make this thing work. And let's get on it. It's my attitude. Let's stop with the silly stuff. Let's get on the important stuff. But tonight's not the time to talk about the silly stuff. Okay, thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
Yes, that's why the whole issue of sustainability, there's no magic bullet to any of these things, so they all have, their pros and their cons as well. Quickly to your question about recycling the lithium batteries, I don't have the specific info on that, but a few months ago I read a story where there's a company in startup that thinks that they have a way in which they can recycle, so they're trying to gear up for that, but I don't have any more details than that. Another announcement I forgot to make. If you haven't already signed petitions, Donna's over here collecting signatures to get the Women's Reproductive Rights Amendment on the ballot in Ohio in November. So when we're finished here, if you haven't signed, please see Donna and sign up so we can get that on the ballot. We're obviously here committed to facts and science and allowing people to make their own decisions based on science, not at the whims of some old white guys. So next up, we have Alicia Davis. She's a PhD student in neuroscience at UC. She's going to talk about adolescent cancer and chemotherapy and its impact on the brain. So please welcome Alicia.
Forgive me for a second. Let me just pull this. Hello. So, I'm about to bum you out. We've been hearing about the future and how it's so hopeful, and cancer's a really big bummer. So, honestly, we really don't know the true implications of what cancer and chemotherapy does to the brain, but that's honestly what I'm trying to figure out with my doctoral project. And this is a little representational figure of kind of my thought process of deciding on that project. So we think that cancer and chemotherapy are inducing some type of inducing brain inflammation that are causing these cognitive deficits, whether that's through either blood-brain barrier integrity issues or cell activational issues. Obviously, with cancer, you can't go work on a human, so you have to have some type of model to mimic the cancer and the chemotherapy exposure. So what we do is we use a mouse model where we give it cancer and then we treat it with chemotherapy. And we are able to test its function, specifically its cognitive function through different tasks. So when I talk about cognitive function, I'm talking about attention, planning, the ability to switch between different tasks. And we test that through a test that looks at whether or not the mouse can identify an object it has seen before. So on the left, you'll see a box with a mouse, and it's got two of the same objects. A little bit later, we'll put that same mouse in the box, and we'll give it two more objects, but one of them is one it has seen, and the other is one it has not seen. So for a normal mouse, Cool. My animations don't work, sorry. So for a normal mouse, it's gonna interact with that new object more often. But with our cancer and chemotherapy model, we see that it interacts with, it has a difficulty distinguishing between an old object and a new object. So it tends to kind of switch back and forth. There we go. That was my animation. So based on this evidence that we have of these cognitive deficits, I want to work on the blood-brain barrier, and kind of what the blood-brain barrier is it's like a tube or like a water hose. So generally, there's really nothing that's going to get through that barrier. There's going to be little to no transfer between the cells that make up that barrier. However, my thought process is it's possible that the chemotherapy is inducing some type of hole in that barrier that's allowing for either immune cells from the or outside of the brain to enter in and cause damage. I have been able to look at this using a small molecule and a large molecule. In this picture, you'll see In this picture, you'll see in the red, those are vessels or arteries or capillaries. They are in red, and this is from a male control animal. It was given saline instead of cancer and chemotherapy. As you can see, you really only see that red from the vasculature. But when we look at a male mouse given cancer and chemotherapy, you see a new color. Those are purple. That is a small molecule, and what it tends to do is it tends to populate around cell bodies. So we're able to see that one, that small molecule is present outside of the vasculature, and two, we can see the cell population, a little bit of the cell populations that they might be interacting with. And one of the projects that I haven't been able to do as much on is looking at the cell interactions. I'm currently working on the astrocyte population of the brain, which is not as well studied like neurons are, which that's kind of what everybody has been studying on. So yeah, that's pretty much my project, has just been like, can I poke holes in the barrier?
So my question would be then is, do you have an understanding yet of the process that the chemotherapy is actually having on creating this leakage? You know, have you found some kind of, cause and effect relationship?
Most of my work is preliminary, so I do have some evidence looking at, specifically looking at gene expression. So that's the transcriptional part of making proteins. And there is some evidence that the proteins that are being made more often are related to dysfunction of the blood-brain barrier and as well dysfunction of the astrocytes. So while I do not fully understand the interaction and the cause of the breakdown of that barrier, I do have some ideas. Hello, yes.
Yeah, so I don't think anybody will argue that cancer and chemotherapy are both not great for your body.
Yeah.
I guess then what I'm curious as is if if you can prove this, what's the outcome? Are you trying to like figure out something that could another alternative treatment or something? What's the end goal? I guess.
Yes. So if you talk to my mentor, the ultimate end goal is to kind of identify the problems that are leading to these cognitive deficits. So hopefully that way, whether it's our lab or some other lab, comes up with either a treatment that does not do that or is a supplement that they can take along with it. Because the chemotherapy they use, most chemotherapies we use are very, what's the right word? Blanking on words. It's very effective in treating the cancer, and we've basically gotten up to the specific cancer we look at. It's like 90% survivability at this point. So we may not want to get rid of the chemotherapy, but a supplement would probably be good. Hello.
Hi. So, just kind of curious, you had the control, you had the chemo or cancer and chemo individual as well up on the board. And obviously, if there's cancer, you want to treat it. But I was kind of curious, do you have like an image of what it looks like with just the cancer? Or, you know, 'cause once again, obviously, if there's the cancer, you're going to want to treat it. And so there's going to, you know, be leakage. But I was just curious if you've identified if it's more the leakage happening because of the cancer or the cancer along with the treatment that's kind of causing that increase in leakiness.
That is a really great question, and it's something that I had. Your question is basically asking whether or not we've looked at cancer alone or chemotherapy alone. We do use those setups in our mouse model, but we have not looked at it yet with my blood-brain barrier permeability assay. It's in the works. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Can you go back to that picture? Where is this?
This is in the prefrontal cortex of the mouse brain. It's the region often associated with cognitive function. So we've been mainly focusing on that brain region.
How do you get this? You like slice the brain open?
Yeah, so what we end up doing is we will flash freeze the brain once we take it, initially with the mouse, we will pump out the blood so that we don't have kind of any effects of red blood cells being present. Once that's flushed out, then we'll flash freeze it and slice it really thin, kind of like on a deli slicer. And then with these molecules, they're autofluorescent, so we don't have to do anything else except put them on a microscope slide. But with other methods of looking at fluorescence, you would have to do some type of processing. I don't know who was first, so one of you choose.
I was just wanting to know, is there a specific type of cancer that you are giving these mice? And if so, does the type of cancer determine on what type of chemotherapy you're doing, or is it just like a broad spectrum type of chemotherapy that you're giving?
That is a great question, and I didn't want to go like super in depth with the model we're using, but yes, we are focusing on a specific type of cancer. And other labs previously in the past have developed a mouse cell line of these cancer cells, and the chemotherapy is specifically for that cancer. It's what is used to treat human patients. think that answered your question.
Yeah, no,
Cool. And then you raise your hand. Hi.
Yeah. Did you say the impetus for the research was other research that did find a cognitive deficit in people who had both the cancer and the chemo?
So your question is whether or not it's based off of case studies of patients?
Right. Like, have there been long-term studies already looking at the cognitive outcomes long-term for people who have cancer and chemotherapy?
I cannot name how many studies there have been, but I do believe there have been studies. And my mentor and I have been fortunate enough to meet some of these people that have survived the cancer and chemotherapy that we work with. And they were actually found us out at a conference and came and talked to us because they saw what we were talking about. So yes, there are cognitive deficits. I don't know necessarily how many case studies there have been on patients, but yeah. Cool.
All right, our third speaker tonight is Sarah Pixley. Sarah is Associate Professor and PhD faculty at UC College of Medicine. Sarah is going to talk about understanding brain function and dementia.
All right. So I'm going to talk about the brain and everything in it, right? I mean, you're going to learn everything about it tonight. No way. I'm going to be focusing on just basics about what happens in the brain, and then on dementia, and focusing on Alzheimer's, which is 60% of the dementia cases. And I had the experience of seeing my mother go through not Alzheimer's, but dementia of the Alzheimer's type, but really it was just old age. It was senility. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how you can distinguish between those two and what it means and what we do. So I've been teaching medical students for many, many years, neuroanatomy, and graduate students, neuroscience. So you can ask me lots of questions. But we do lots of things like force them to learn all these parts of the brain, okay? And so we know a lot about it, and we know all these bumps, the gyri and sulci, are the hills and vales of the brain. And this picture has, let me see if I can do the pointer. Oops. There we go. So this picture, the eyeball's here, so the front of the brain is here, and the back is here. And we really know every one of these bumps, okay, through the brain. And I torture my students by making them learn all those bumps. And the bumps are incredibly consistent from people to people. I can tell you this bump in this person might change a little bit, but they're very consistent. And then the other thing we found was they mean something. And the brain specializes. So different parts of the brain do different things and specialize. And then you can tell just the overall is the front part of the brain is kind of the motor part. And the back part of the brain deals with senses like vision and hearing and touch. And then it sends it forward. And the front part of the brain decides what to do with all that sensory information it just got overloaded with. Okay? So this was known a long time ago. But dementia is still a mystery for several reasons. So we know sensory input goes in and motor output comes out, and it's the big black box in between. And that's where things happen. So to go further on all the things in the brain, okay, we can name all these colored parts we know deal with kind of the actions. So the sensory coming in, the motor going out. But then there are two areas, these gray areas, that are the mysterious parts, where odd things happen. And so we have a posterior one, where it looks at all the senses together. So it makes sense of hearing and seeing writing and things like that. And then it hands it all off to the front part of the brain, where even more mysterious stuff goes on. You consult with your maps of memory and your consequences. You decide, here's our goal, but this outside looks really sunny and I want to go out, but I'm going to sit in this lecture hall and listen to this droning lecture. Instead, you make all those decisions and then you make your body do something about it. Okay. So, I'm sorry. So what's fascinating about dementias is they occur in these two gray areas, okay? If you have Alzheimer's, you can still see, you can still hear, you can still walk, okay? So it's not interfering with these major input and output areas. It's dealing with these mysterious parts in between. And they've been mysterious for many years, but I'm going to talk about how the advances that we hope now will move us forward towards that. So, what we've learned about brain function. Does anybody know this guy? Yep. This is Phineas Gage, okay? And so all of that stuff I just told you about different parts of the brain was known in the 1800s, okay? And it came from studying lesions. And so Phineas, unfortunate, got this thing rammed through his brain. And it was the first time we started to understand that that gray area in the front part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex that Alicia mentioned. Okay? So what came after that? Well, we got much more specific. Okay? We started looking at magnetic resonance imaging, an MRI that's unrelated to the MRI you talked about earlier. And this is a fancy imaging technique that allows us to see the brain. So this is a cross-section just like this one right here, and you're looking at the brain, and all the gray is what we call anatomical MRI. Just we know what it is. It tells it where all the hills and dales are, gyri and sulci. But then we came up with a functional MRI, and all the little yellow and colored spots in there are very specific regions, really tiny regions. And they all get, for example, in speech, certain patterns appear. In finger tapping, another part of the brain is active. In listening, another part is there. So we can now start to put even more spins on understanding what parts of the brain do what. And it's really taken us a long way. I have some allergies going on, and I may need my water if you could. Thank you. Okay, what else is going on? We have PET scanning, okay, positron emission tomography. And what this does is infuses the body and the brain with something that they can then detect. It happens to be radioactive in this case. And so for sugar, they've shown that they just look at the brain, and red means lots of things, and blue means less of things. And so a normal brain has lots of activity going on. It's using up a lot of glucose. So it's taking up all that radioactive signal. But then you start mild cognitive impairment. You're on your downward slope towards Alzheimer's. And there's a huge, anywhere from 10 to 20 years that we believe that these things are going on in the brain. But we first start detecting mild cognitive impairment, and then Alzheimer's is more extreme, and we have lots of areas that are blue. In 2004, we made a big advance because somebody came up with another tracer instead of glucose called the Pittsburgh compound B, okay? And this binds to the amyloid plaques that are a major feature found in the cells of Alzheimer's. So you've got these plaques and tangles that appear in Alzheimer's. So prior to this nice biomarker, it was incredibly hard to diagnose Alzheimer's. Okay, you could get the behavior, but there's several dementias, and there are lots of different flavors of it. you lost your memory, but everybody over 80 has memory loss, okay? And the only way to do it was to dissect the brain after the person died, and see how many plaques and tangles there were. So being able to actually detect the tangles, the plaques, in the living person is fantastic. So we can start looking earlier and earlier, because the only way to really address Alzheimer's is thought early in intervention, because your neurons are gradually dying. So okay, what else comes on? Another pretty picture. So this is called diffusion tensor imaging. Okay, and you see lots of little spaghetti lines, right? So now we're using a system similar to the yellow spots here, similar to functional MRI, to find out the connections between things. And we can actually tell whether the water's moving forward or backwards, and it's based on water flow through the brain tissue, actually. Okay, so that's cool. Now we can connect things. All right, what's next? All right, we're going to pause here and talk about some of the things that you can do at the bedside or at home to start thinking about whether your relative has Alzheimer's. So what goes on in Alzheimer's that doesn't go on in senility is that first your memory goes, but so does that in age. Short-term memory, long-term memory. But next, Alzheimer's seems to go up into this gray area here, posterior parietal area of the brain in the sensory area. So name one characteristic of Alzheimer's patients that you have to watch out about. They get lost. Pardon? They can't say people's names. That's a little lower here. But they also get lost a lot. So this area particularly coordinates spatial relationships, and it has to how we walk in, where we are talking about, doing this sort of things. Normal senility does not really have such a heavy emphasis of going up into that parietal area and sensory area. So my mom would not, get lost until she thought her kids were asking her to come find them, and she had to go find her kids. We were fine. But in senility and regular aging, everything kind of shrinks a little, brain does. The memory is very susceptible, goes first, but they don't really have this parietal area. So we use a relatively simple tool to ask the patient to draw a clock with the hands at XYZ, 7:30. Now you have to watch out. The person, if they have arthritis, they're going to have trouble with the drawing. My mother would always just, what number did you say? What time did you say? Was it 7:30, was it? But in Alzheimer's, gradually, they can't get it in the right place, and they can't space it out properly. And this gets worse and worse until they can't even make a circle. And then they have, severely, they can't really do anything. This clock face is also really interesting for any other kind of problem in that area. And this is kind of an extreme. Does anybody know what that indicates? It's
Sort
not
of like when your handwriting gets small.
It's not micronesia. It's not micro writing. They put all the numbers on one side because they have a lesion that affects all their attention. They don't pay attention to the other side of the world. And that also, paying attention to things, is in that parietal area. So this is kind of an extreme, probably more often caused by a tumor or stroke or damage, traumatic damage. So the clock face has been really, really interesting in this. And it's one part of the mini mental status exam that's given quite frequently to older people, okay? And someone we know took this exam. And the first is, asking you what's your name, what the time is, what the date is, to general cognitive abilities. And then you're asked to memorize 3 common words. So table, chair, person, okay? And can you remember that? Okay, and most people can. If you have a pretty far advanced dementia, you can't do that memorization. Then they ask you, count backwards from 100 by sevens. That's horrible. And to make it simple, they say, spell the word world backwards. Okay, and my mom could do that, no problem. And then they asked you to remember those 3 words again. Okay, so you've got short-term memory, being able to remember it in the first place. And then you have long-term memory. Did you remember it after you did a difficult mental task? And then they go on and they do other ones that test other parts of the brain, but they include a kind of a version of the clock face to see, specifically test that upper part of the brain.
So what happens with young people now that don't know how to read a clock? In 50, 60 years.
That's a good point, if they do it digitally, right? And so, what else I was going to say? So that's kind of at the patient level. So now, even fancier stuff's coming. And so the new thing is networks, okay? This is the new era that we're in now. So we have the spots, and we have that interconnections between them. Then they discovered something interesting. So you put the person in a scanner, and they realized that they're just sitting there. You're in the scanner, you're waiting for something to happen, you're kind of daydreaming. And certain spots were lighting up in the fMRI. Or if you could do an electrical, 2 parts of the brain would be doing the same pattern at the same time. So these are networks, and they're different ones, okay? So this one is the first one they found, the default mode network, because it's what you're doing by default when you're in the scanner. All right, and it's about knowing what, memory, making sense of self. This one is knowing when to do the right thing at the right time, so we call it the salience network, appropriateness. And this particular pattern here is knowing how to do things. It's that working memory, it's goals, it's executive function, so it's called executive network. Well, it turns out that this one's disrupted in Alzheimer's. This one's disrupted in frontotemporal dementia, which is kind of the second most common. And the third one is in Lewy body or Parkinson's disease dementia. So all of a sudden, people were trying to track the various connections and say, oh, well, maybe a virus went through and damaged all these really weird places that we don't understand the connections to. Now we know that there are these networks going on and that they're different between different dementias. So the whole dementia field is really coming up to speed and understanding this. It's still expensive to do an MRI and these studies, but it's really telling us a lot about what happens, because what neuroscientists are taught early on is neurons that wire together fire together, right? Because they're all interconnected. Well, what we're learning now is they also tire together and then expire together. So that makes sense. All these guys are pulsing at the same time, so they get a little tired and they all die, which is explaining this very random pattern we see in these dementias that we couldn't understand anyway. So that's my talk. Open to questions. Yeah.
So I had a question on the MRI picture with the PET scans as well. The Alzheimer's disease brain, it looked like it was larger, and I was wondering, is that just the color of the picture playing tricks on me? Or
Yes, it's just the color of the picture, and it might be a totally different person.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, in the PET
Yeah, and this is just a smaller picture. I didn't put scale bars on there. I should have. But if you notice this brain, this blue part that's not functioning well, that's that parietal area. So we can see this. So even in some of my textbooks for neuroanatomy, I can look at a picture and go, that's an Alzheimer's. Because the frontal part is all okay, and then you get these gaps between the gyri, the big white sulci, in the parietal region. Whereas in frontotemporal, you'll have the frontal part will be degenerating and widening cracks in there. So yeah.
Thank you.
Other. Come on.
In a perfect world where we had choices and we had the medical system to do this, wouldn't it be a good idea for people in their 60s and 70s to have PET, Pittsburgh, other things like, if they wanted
Right.
to get that information early?
Yes. And then,
Or doesn't it matter? Or is it like, you know what, we don't know how to fix it. It's going to be a problem. Just, live large, spend all your money. Party like there's 19, just go for it now while you can.
no, what you'd want to do is stop drinking. Right? Because it's harsh on the brain. We're getting closer. We still don't know what can alter this progression. We don't understand what causes the plaques. There's a lot of research still to be done. But what we do know is there are many healthy lifestyle choices that you can make and start implementing earlier. So a case in point is Chris Helmsworth, who has been in the news the last couple days. They found out that he had a gene that is super high risk for Alzheimer's. So if they have 2 copies of ApoE4, you're at very high risk for developing Alzheimer's. So he's made a statement. He's going to change his health habits. He's going to take it easier. He's going to do whatever he can that are healthy brain habits to try and not have that decline so rapidly. But yes, we'd love to come up with something. There's a lot of research on what can you do. We know it's as classic as many of these neurodegenerative diseases, the cells don't have enough energy. So their little mitochondria are not working properly. So if we can develop some techniques to help the cells at that level, their little energy storage, we can maybe boost and keep that decline from happening. Exercise is it's very well proven that's going to slow mild cognitive impairment. So at this point, we don't have a magic bullet, but we have a lot of healthy lifestyle things we can do. Questions? Yeah.
So this amyloid plaque, is that the only cause that we found for Alzheimer's?
It's the only biomarker we have. It was the first biomarker. So there are plaques and tangles, and there was just been huge controversy about which came first, and one camp was saying it's the tau, the tangles that were the problem, and the other camp says the amyloid's the problem. And we don't know if it's just after the fact, that that's just a sign of some of the cells going bad. But we do know that this amyloid is nasty. Have you heard of a prion? Anybody? Raise your hands. So rabies is a prion. So it's a little bitty particle of peptides or things that actually can aggregate and then affect the next protein that it encounters and make that bad, and then keep progressing around, making everything bad around itself. So we think that amyloid is acting like that kind of a molecule, and is spreading and altering cells next to it and going through the brain.
Are there any of the plaques that cause mental dysfunction or anything like that? Or is it only an amyloid plaque?
We don't know. These are particularly amyloid plaques, yes. And January of 2023, FDA approved a drug that in animals reduces the amyloid. And it's been shown that it has to be given by an injection. and they've taken it out to 18 months, and definitely there's an improvement. There's less of cognitive decline, and suggesting that it's getting even better at 18 months. So they stopped the clinical trial and got it approved as an experimental treatment. So yeah, there's hope. Anything else? Yep.
Have there been any of these scans done on someone who's had chemotherapy?
Good idea. I should have thought to look that up in there. But yes, I bet there have been, to see certainly like the glucose test, to see if you've got lowered functioning. And the fMRI might not be as warranted there, but the PET scan would.
Before and after would be really.
Yeah, it would be. That, your insurance is not going to pay for that. Unless we really find something that we can, use for that. And let's see. So Alzheimer's, you've got the spatial area wrong. It also goes somewhat into the emotional area and the frontal lobes, so you get excessive emotions. Oh, and the other thing is, my mother said, I wish I had Alzheimer's. They're very cheerful. That part of the brain, when it's damaged, people ignore anything bad about themselves. So they actually are essentially not knowing of their condition. So a lesion there, it not only does it one-sided on the clock face, but they'll ignore their own leg and and the anxiety is down from any disease they have. So the extreme of that is if, patient says the leg in there, I'm just going to get up. What is that thing? Why did it come with me? The Man Who Mistook His Wife's Head for a Hat is a book by Oliver Sacks that goes through some of these wonderful, interesting, well, not wonderful for them, no, it's not wonderful, but these types of lesions to different parts of the brain and the odd things that can occur. It's very readable. I highly recommend it. So they're very cheerful. And instead, the dementia my mother had, the senile dementia, actually brought extreme aggravation to her and depression. And that's more a function. There are parts of the brain that, when damaged, cause depression, in addition to other things that cause depression. So she would have a hard time getting out a word. She would have a problem with that. And then she'd say, I'm so stupid, and be very upset about it and be upset at herself for not remembering something. Whereas an Alzheimer's patient, I'm fine, And that has to do with the part of the brain that it's affecting. Okay, thank you.
Well, in our time remaining, I'm going to share a story with you about the trials and tribulations of bringing a drug to market. It involves infection, big pharma, and unfortunately death. So some years ago, there was a small advanced medical research company that was working with monoclonal antibodies. You may have heard those in the popular press relative to COVID, because monoclonal antibodies were used in part with the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccines. Monoclonal antibodies can be trained to attach to certain cells in the body. And this particular company was very much interested in infection, how we can find infections in the body. Sometimes it's very difficult to diagnose infection. So they were able to train a monoclonal antibody to attach to neutrophils. Neutrophils are a type of white blood cell. And so they then teamed up with a much larger pharmaceutical company that funded their research, et cetera, et cetera. And this company was involved in nuclear medicine. So what they devised was to conjoin the monoclonal antibody to a radioisotope, in this case technetium. And when this was injected intravenously in the bloodstream, the monoclonal antibody would go and seek out the neutrophils, attach to it, and then they would use a gamma camera to light up the body and see where the infection was. It actually worked quite well. So they moved forward with clinical trials, and they specifically narrowed it down to appendicitis. They did that for a couple reasons. One, because it's fairly easy to do clinical trials with something like appendicitis, and it was very narrowly focused in trying to look at all the broad spectrum of infection. So they got through the clinical trials, and it actually worked quite well. One of the reasons that they considered appendicitis is that often there's misdiagnosis. So, you show up at 10 o'clock at night at the emergency room and you have severe lower intestinal pain. You have no other signs or symptoms, and the ER doc sends you home and says, well, you probably just have gastritis from the burrito that you ate a couple hours ago at Taco Bell. Then that person shows back up at 2:30 in the morning with a burst appendix, and then you have a serious problem. The other issue is that CT is often used to help try to diagnose appendicitis, but CT can only really show you the size of the appendix, so if it's enlarged or if it's a normal size. And often you get false positives with CT, which results in unnecessary surgeries. They cut you open, they take the appendix out, and they say, oh, the appendix was okay. So that's not good for the patient, having to go through a surgery. It also uses up hospital resources unnecessarily. So this particular diagnostic imaging drug worked really well to help better diagnose and also to cut down on the false positives. So they got FDA approval. They brought the product to market with the intention that they were going to do additional clinical trials down the road for other areas of infection. One of the underlying reasons that they focused just on appendicitis is because they knew it would be quick to get through clinical trials, and they were under a lot of financial pressure to try to get the product to market as quickly as possible. So they did get it approved. So unfortunately, the revenue stream was not as robust as they had hoped from appendicitis, and that was because of several things. One thing, this was a new imaging drug. There were a lot of people out there that, it takes a while for people to buy into something new. We even talked to some surgeons, surprisingly, who were kind of blasé about just going ahead, and if they think somebody has appendicitis, just go ahead and cut them open. They were blasé about it. It was kind of bizarre. So there's that. The other problem with nuclear medicine and nuclear imaging, not every hospital has a nuclear imaging department, and those that do aren't always available 24/7. CT is readily available. You can get a CT, whenever you want, so sometimes that's easier. So, but there was some acceptance of the drug. It was just taking time. So the company, to try to boost revenue, then made what turned out to be a fatal change in tactics. And they started to promote the drug off-label. So you've probably have heard that. Off-label means that a physician will prescribe a drug for some other purpose other than what it is officially approved for. Physicians have tremendous latitude in their ability to prescribe. So if a physician says, hey, I want you to try this drug, blah, blah, blah. The most current example is Ozempic, the diabetes drug that now everybody is, using for weight loss. There's other examples. Rogaine originally was for another purpose, and then by accident they found out that it grew hair. Didn't do anything for me. So they started to promote off-label, and they had what were considered champions. There were 2 or 3 physicians who were championing the drug for off-label use to use it for other types of infection other than appendicitis. These people are actually, get some remuneration from the pharmaceutical company. So you get into some gray area about ethics on those kind of things, but it had been, an accepted practice. And so these physicians would conduct some tests, they would write papers, they would go to symposiums, etc., talking up to use this imaging drug for other types of infection. Of particular interest were infections of the bone. They can be extremely difficult to try to pinpoint and isolate. So there started to be more and more acceptance of the drug for off-label use. Revenues start to go up. Everything seems to be moving in the proper direction. They are planning to do more clinical trials to get official approval. And then, within about 6 weeks of each other, 2 people died after receiving the diagnostic imaging drug. Now, both of these patients were very elderly. They were extremely sick. Both had coronary pulmonary disease. One also had diabetes. And they both had severe infections, which up to that point, their physicians could not figure out what was the source of the infection. So they went ahead and administered the drug. These 2 patients had a severe allergic reaction, and they ultimately both died. So in the aftermath and the full investigation, et cetera, ultimately, the FDA pulled the drug off the market. And the pharmaceutical company, they had invested a lot of money into this, but it was so negative, there were so many problems, et cetera, they finally just decided to cut their losses and not pursue it any further. So the somewhat moral of the story is obviously when they initially did the clinical trials, they were focused just on appendicitis. So what's the demographic or the population for appendicitis? People tend to be younger, and for the most part, they tend to be healthy, with the exception of having some appendicitis symptoms. Well, obviously, the 2 patients that received this drug that died were completely different than the population that was used in the clinical trials. So that was their big mistake. Had the company maybe not been so concerned about the pressure on revenue, and had they done broader clinical trials initially with a bigger population, older populations, people that had some other type of comorbid risk, they may have determined what cautions you would need for that drug in terms of eliminating people that have certain types of diseases, whether it's age, whether it's the amount of dosage, et cetera. But that didn't happen. And the unfortunate outcome beyond is that the drug was extremely promising. Not only did it prove value with appendicitis, but in those test cases with other infections like bone infection, it worked really well. When they gave the drug and they hit the gamma camera, boom, it would light up right away, and you could definitively find where that infection was. So that's the tale. So many people get down on pharmaceutical companies, and sometimes rightly deserved. But companies do invest a ton of money into R&D, and many drugs, never get out of clinical trials. those are monies lost. So when they do find something that works, obviously they want to try to get their return on investment and get their return on investment as quickly as possible. But this was a case where they had, made some errors in judgment in terms of how they were going to promote the drug in an off-label environment, and it ended up costing them. So that's the story. Any questions on that?
Yeah, I have a question. So is there a problem with attaching to the white blood cells? It seems like it could, and I guess the whole point of it is it assumes that the white blood cells are working correctly.
Yes, any type of drug that you're putting in your body obviously has risks. You see all these commercials, now on TV for all these various drugs, and they have the whole litany of things that, are contraindications or things that you'd avoid. So drugs can be pretty nasty. They may have a good outcome, but they can also carry a lot of side effects and a lot of risks. And honestly, at this point, it's been a few years. I don't recall if they ultimately determined, the specific reason why that drug, created that negative outcome. But obviously, some of these things that you get ingested are nasty things. Talking earlier about chemotherapy, I mean, those drugs, can really attack the body. And, so, it's not just like taking an aspirin, so many of these things are very serious things that you ingest. Any other questions? All right. Well, thanks everyone for coming out in the rain again. Really appreciate it. It's nice on occasion to have these science shots so that we can, cover several topics at one time, because there are so many wonderful things that are going on in the community, in our science community, and that's the whole purpose for Science on Tap, is to try to promote the local science and all the local scientists that are doing the work. So I thank you all again for that. Just a reminder, again, if you haven't signed the petitions or would like to, Don is over there taking petitions. And strongly recommend you consider going to our big event on April 24th at the Playhouse, Monday, April the 24th. You can take those sheets with you as a reminder. You can go to our Facebook page at Science on Tap Cincinnati and get the details. This is a ticketed event, so you need to go to the link at Eventbrite to sign up. And then lastly, again, we're then additionally back here May 3rd, talk about the Mill Creek restoration. That's Wednesday, the May 3rd. And not trying to be remiss, want to thank, as always, our friends Urban Artifact and Radio Artifact for providing this production. All of our events are streamed and recorded, and you can always go back and see these or any of our other presentations by going to the Radio Artifact channel at YouTube or Twitch. So again, thank you so much for coming out, and drive safely going home, because it looks like it's still raining.